So the community at Wolfson is exceptionally diverse. We have people from so many different countries and backgrounds.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan, I'm from Brazil.
Hello, I'm Michaela, I'm from South Africa.
I'm Arjun, I'm from Singapore.
And I'm from the United States.
I am from the Philippines.
I'm originally from Yorkshire.
I'm from Shropshire. I'm from Mexico.
I was born in Washington, D.C., but actually grew up all over the world. I spent 6 years in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa, and 10 years in Tunisia before going back to the U.S.
I'm from Montreal, so I'm French Canadian.
I come from Jerusalem, Israel.
You know, we have so many different people from different countries, different nationalities, different ethnicities.
Yeah. I really don't know a country from which I haven't met someone.
It's like traveling around the world a little bit.
Everybody is also from somewhere else.
Yes.
Because it's such an international community.
But you get so many more interesting conversations with people from wherever, and you also get really good holidays. I'm going to Jordan next month to visit a wolf.
A wolf.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another episode of the Wolfson Entrepreneur Society event. We're excited to bring you amazing speakers today on this panel to look at what we will be looking at when it comes to going global with local startup ideas. So, but before then, I would like to, as usual, tell you why we actually have this event. The Wolfson Entrepreneur Society was actually founded because we want to kind of tap into the proximity of the students at Wolfson College and within the Cambridge ecosystem as well. Because you can imagine Wolfson College, like the video you've just watched now, we have every year over 90 people coming from different 90 countries represented at Wolfson. So you can imagine that international community and the kind of ideas and the brain power that brings. So we want to now leverage on those proximity that the college life gives to allow students kind of interact with themselves, with alumni, with the Cambridge ecosystem, and even with the wider world. So that is the reason we decided to form the Wolfson Entrepreneur Society. And I must say that it has been an amazing society so far. We've been able to organize a series of events and then having a whole lot of competition to support startup ideas, support students who have series of ideas. And so today we are going to be looking at one of the key important topics that startups, entrepreneurs, businesses will be looking at when it comes to boosting their business capacity, and that is going global with local startup ideas, because every idea, we believe, starts at the local level. And then we have to see how we can move those ideas to global and how you can build teams in order to actually maximize the tendency of you doing that. And so today I have brought in 3 experts from completely different fields, because we want to make sure that people are bringing in ideas from different backgrounds to put together and see how this can be made possible. And so without further ado, I will allow our panelists to introduce themselves. And so I'm going to go for the first person, maybe Joe, if you would like to spend a couple of minutes, tell us about your background, and then
Sure.
we can take it up from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, David, for the invitation first. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name's Joe. I'm a patent attorney at a firm called J.A. Camp, and I'm based in Cambridge. So my role is to help businesses or individuals to manage their intellectual property. Part of that is filing patent applications, but it's by no means limited to that. On the other side, I also advise my clients on how to manage other people's intellectual property rights, so what we call freedom to operate. And my clients range in size from kind of brand new startups all the way to global businesses and everyone in between. And all of those clients will have some interest in protecting their intellectual property and doing business all over the world. If they're not already doing it, then they certainly have aspirations to do that. So yeah, I'm on hand to hopefully steer them in the right direction with regards to intellectual property.
All right, thank you very much for the brief intro, Joe. Now we move next to our panelist two, Paul. Paul, if you could spend a couple of minutes to tell us one or two things about you.
Sure. I wasn't sure if it was Paul or Paolo there for a moment, but it's Paul.
Yeah.
Truly international panel. All right. Well, I'm the English Paul anyway. Yeah. So my area of interest is fairly wide, but the core, I suppose, is I run a creative producing agency based in Cambridge, but with branches in different countries. So we produce various different types of theatrical productions and events on the one side. And I think it'd be interesting to talk about how we've done that. The two main companies that we run, or countries running, are the Czech Republic and Russia. And Russia is particularly interesting. Although we tour our work internationally, we have actual companies that we've set up in these two countries to expand our work. I'll talk a little bit about that. But also on the other side, as you know, David, I think you were one of my students at one stage. I also teach at business school, and I'm very interested in the way that teams work and the way that essentially what stories are we telling as teams. And so you set up a team. You set up a team maybe locally. Is it aspirational to naturally want to go global? Is that team the right team to do that? Does it mean you're going to lose focus locally if you go global? What risks are you taking? I'm very interested in that. And also through my consulting, I quite interestingly have done a fair bit of work with companies coming to the UK, particularly from Russia. And I think Joe would have some comments about this. It's very, very interesting. You're working with very different legal systems. But also particularly, if you think about somewhere like Russia, which I'm very interested in, if you have a Russian product technology, how is it viewed and perceived in other countries? Now, they're not necessarily the bad guys because they're brilliant at many things. But if you're trying to sell products, the perception and build a brand. So actually, quite interestingly, a couple of the companies I've worked with in Russia coming to the UK and to the US, you wouldn't know that it was actually that company because they've kind of come in as a type of a ghost. Working with local businesses. So it might be interesting to talk about that. But yeah, so going from those consulting jobs right the way through to my core work, which is in the theatre. So hopefully we can talk a bit about that.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. You guys can start seeing why I said that we have an amazing panel with vast experience across field to talk about this. So I'm going to move quickly to Paula, who is the last but not the least of our panelists. So briefly introduce himself.
Thanks, David. So my background has been mostly in R&D, and so my perspective is sort of R&D centric when I talk about these topics. I started as an academic. I was in bioengineering at the University of Washington, Seattle for about a decade, and after that I left academia and joined first Pfizer in San Diego, and then MedImmune AstraZeneca in Cambridge. And I was mostly involved in their drug discovery and development programs. And most recently, I took up a position as VP of Development Sciences at Kymab, which is actually in your neck of the woods, of course. But most recently, I actually moved to Belgium and took a role as the Chief Development Officer at Confo Therapeutics, which is a company in the Ghent, Belgium area. And there, I'm tasked with building and leading their development organization. The company is growing to include development in addition to discovery. And so my role there is sort of to help them do that. So define, identify, and recruit the necessary skills to progress their growing portfolio towards the clinic. So my perspective has touched upon several different settings. One is the large research university, then big pharma in a couple of roles, then clinical stage biotech, and now sort of growing discovery to development biotech. And so that's sort of I think the perspective that I bring is a bit R&D centric, but it's also global in perspective. So hopefully we'll have good discussion.
All right, great. So thank you guys for making our time to actually join us today. It's a great pleasure. So you guys can see that we have a vast majority of expertise both in terms of team building, in terms of the legal aspects of building businesses, in terms of going global experience, having experience with multinationals. And so we want to believe that we're going to tap into this series of experiences that our panelists bring in order to dissect what we have today. So without wasting time, I'm going to dive straight into the topic of today, which is going global with local startup ideas, building a team for global reach. So I'm going to start by asking our panelists to give their perspective on what it actually means when we talk about local idea or global idea, or when we talk about ideas for local and global consumers. And so I don't know who's going to go first, but maybe I would begin with Joe again. If you could spend a couple of minutes to tell us, what do you think? What makes an idea local?
I think actually it's probably very difficult to have a local idea these days. I think most ideas have wide application. They're certainly transferable from one place to another. And if you've got, if we're talking science and technology here, which is obviously my area and Paolo's, then yeah, I mean, almost every technical development will have applications across the globe. So I think having a local idea is very difficult. I think a local idea is only really a local idea if it's so specific that it only applies to a local community. And I think those are just very few and far between.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
To echo that, Joe, I think that there's very few ideas that are good, that are truly only local in reach, and it's an increasingly, at least pre-COVID, I think nobody can predict what's going to happen after this, after the pandemic. But certainly the trajectory before that was that of an increasingly connected world, right? And when I reflect about local versus global, I think you're right. I agree with that. I mean, there's very few ideas. Most ideas these days are global in reach, but we can think about this in terms of market. So the reach of a certain idea, then you probably have a choice there in terms of local versus global. But I think when the time comes to assemble your team, so sort of the talent, that you need to sort of bring the idea to fruition, I think it would be a little limiting to think about the team in a local setting. Most good teams are global in reach. And so with the unprecedented access that we have now to global talent, I think that the best teams are usually global. So I think that's where the choice is not really there. So, but I agree with you that global can be execution or market, but most good ideas tend to be global at one point.
That is great. Paul, would you have something to chip in?
Okay, well, I come from a slightly different perspective. And I mean, coming away from the science and technology idea, actually, I think local should not I know you're not using it in any way as a negative, but actually, I think the complete opposite. I think of it as grounded. I think of it as real. And actually, it's quite interesting. A lot of the ideas, and I work with a lot of, obviously, students and ideas that are working in science and technology, but also I've seen in the last few years quite a little shift, actually, of mindset. Because I think some people have got feel particularly in services and where they're making things, so products, that actually what I'm seeing is a little reversal of people coming back into local ideas. So you'll find that more people are, for example, I mean, maybe I'm talking about the middle classes here, and I'll be slightly careful, but you find a lot of people are much more conscious about buying things locally. So we all, there's an idea that actually, do we want to buy all of our goods and services from Amazon, for example? Do we want to, So actually, you'll find that more and more people are going to local markets. They are thinking, and actually, if you think about a lot of I'm thinking of some sort of local things that have gone global. So you think of something like Innocent Drinks, okay? They're very local, festival-based, local stores. Actually, through their journey, Innocent Drinks have become a world leader in this kind of field. Okay, at some stage they got a large investment from Coca-Cola, but actually the brand was built on being local and being charity-based. So actually, for me, the idea actually is that that in certain areas of services, the local story is absolutely really, really fascinating. Can that then be translated globally? And I'll just finish up, because I don't want to take too much time on this, with this provocation, is that actually in my area of the arts, particularly film, theatre, music, being working in a particular area, and I'll just use the area we're working in, which is developing new film, theatre, whatever it might be, from the UK, actually is a brand. It's local stories, but it actually is a brand itself. And if you go around the world, you see musicals, theatre, dance, pop music, and a lot of it has emanated with that British sort of dynamic of culture. We know we're struggling with one of the great things we're struggling with at the moment is how do we retain our value of the culture that we create when everything is closed. But if you go to, you go to New York, or you go to anywhere in the world, actually South America, Europe, you will see British products, British, which include, and a few of them are things at a very small scale that I've created. And I suppose the final thing I'll just say about this is one of the models that I've generated is that we take our work internationally, but we also leave it there, and often it is then translated into the local language. So the work we have 4 productions in the Czech Republic at the moment, which are in Czech, and we have 3 productions in Russia, which are in Russian, even though they're British stories. So I sort of leave that as a kind of mixture, very different from the science and technology, of somehow the value of local. We build things locally, then we take them to other places. I wouldn't describe them as global, I'd describe them more as internationalizing than global, maybe.
Thank you. That is really an insight. And I would like to actually link up all the contributions that the 3 panelists has made, from the fact that ideas can not really be localized. So the point that there are ideas that you can see by virtue of their physical location, by virtue of the activities they have, they restrict themselves within localities. But before I tie these things up, I would like to gain the panelist perspective on, we have seen in terms of local ideas, your own contributions. So let's see what you think about ideas that are really global. What are the identity of these ideas that are global? And how can we actually say that, okay, this global idea is completely different from this idea which is localized?
But maybe I was going to say something a little different, which is that maybe we shouldn't be thinking about, it's almost like a circle, right? So there are good ideas, say, in the creative arts, for example. Drug development is by itself a global enterprise, but I'm thinking of the creative arts mostly. Good ideas usually start local, and then because they have global appeal, they become global. And then they sort of become localized, so they adapt themselves to every corner of the world because they have such a broad appeal, they have such global reach, right? So it's more of a maybe not. We shouldn't be thinking about local and global ideas. We should be thinking about local ideas that are so good, that appeal to people from all walks of life and corners of the world, and then they sort of become global. But the storytelling is such that they become, enmeshed in the local culture. So I guess the examples that I'm thinking are the creative arts. Maybe there are others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ties back into Paul's point about the translation of the work from country to country. There's this underlying fundamental idea which kind of just transcends everything. Like, we're all humans, we can all appeal to this story, whatever it might be. But it's how that's implemented, and any specific cultural references can be translated from, one culture to another, and it might end up being slightly different, but you've still got the underlying global concept underneath it all.
I mean,
okay,
sorry, David, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually
the guys are taking my answers from me in a great way, and I'm actually fascinated because I really understand how it works with trying to internationalize. I think I'd rather say I'd hardly think the work that I'm doing is global, but it's internationalizing it. And I always, as a individual, and which I sort of sell myself as a product and a service, as a consultant and as a director, whatever it might be. Sort of the 2 things that I think are quite interesting when in the broader terms. One is when I worked in the States, I went for 2.5 years to work in New York. I was more British in America than I was in Britain. The simple reason of that is because that became I became more the brand of me. Because I was differentiating myself in a very full market. So I became, and I think that's very interesting how that works with products and services. You sort of accentuate your locale, you know, what you bring to that place, because you're bringing something new, or you're competing in a market that already exists. And the other reason that I do a lot of work in Russia, apart from the fact I really like the place, is because not many people want to do it, because it's really hard. It's really tough legally. It's really, I had to set up companies, really tough financially working it out. But if you can get in there and you really can fight in that market, then actually there's very, very few people who are prepared to go through that. And I found myself sort of, you know, now in this market in Russia, where there are not that many people. But I think that's very different. If you're talking, you know, Paolo, you mentioned AstraZeneca and things like this, and that, you know, if you're working on developing pharmaceuticals and things, then suddenly the idea of global is hugely going to differentiate whether you're working in distributing in Africa, in India, in the UK, in Europe. That is really where the global challenge comes, and how do you then work within those massively different markets to be able to, and I'm sure that is one of the huge challenges that some pharmaceutical companies must have all the time. I certainly sort of sense it anyway.
Okay, great. I think that kind of wraps it up. But where I want to drive now is the fact that if you still look around us, you see that there are startups, there are businesses which would have this tendency of going global, of going international. But for some reason, they restrict themselves within that locality, maybe within a state, within the country, and all that. So I believe there are certain things that probably is preventing those businesses from actually going global. It could be the team. It could be that from the start, they've not kind of have that global mindset in order to plan and then target moving that business to some other countries and adapting them to those countries. So that boils down to the point where a couple of people have sent in questions to me, asking me about protection of your idea. That sometimes if your idea is global, it's easier for you to kind of lose it out to someone else who can buy into your idea and develop it into something else, and you lose whatever it is you're supposed to gain from there. And so because of that, people will rather want to remain in the UK, where they think that, okay, the laws we have within the land might be able to protect my idea. I know the terrain and all that. So what are your own contributions with respect to protecting ideas, both locally and adapting that idea on the global stage? How do you think the protection of your idea that you want to use in launching your business affects the extent to which you push your business?
Well, firstly, I think it should be the other way around. The protection should be something to support the business. It should be the business that's driving forward, not the other way around. You shouldn't be, in my view, you shouldn't be worried about not moving into a different market because you're scared you might not be able to keep things under control and protect it there. You should, have the ambition to go into that market, and then, what do I need to do to support that? I mean, that should be the way around that you look at it. And I think I think it probably comes down to fundamentally whatever the confidence that the business has in itself. If you're apprehensive about moving into a different market and that's holding you back, then that's the mindset that needs to change.
Where do you think that apprehension comes from? Sometimes, it could be resources, it could be fear of regulations, it could be just resistance by the founders. Have you seen other reasons why this apprehension may arise?
It could be all of the above. There are obviously hurdles to get over, and significant ones when you're entering a new market. It does require a lot of investment. and if you don't have the resources, then you're going to struggle to do it. But you can, if you have the drive to push there, then and the idea to back it up, obviously, the product in the first place, then hopefully you'll be able to find people to get behind you. And I guess that comes into building the team. It's not just your own team, but your advisors, your investors, everything.
Yeah. It's a fine balance, isn't it? You want to give away just enough to get people excited. You don't want to give away the farm, but at the same time you want to you don't want to stifle the conversations that occur at a very early stage by having people sign NDAs and things like that, just to tell me that you're working on something. So yeah, it's but I agree completely. Protection of ideas has to be secondary to the strategic objectives. Well, I shouldn't say secondary. I should say supportive and aligned.
Yeah, I think that's right, definitely.
Okay, so that will actually take me to the second question, which looks at being multinational. Because when I think about global businesses, the word that comes to my mind is being multinational. So in your own perspective, what do you think? What does it take to be a multinational? Is this something that startups can target from any stage? Like when you're building your businesses from the scratch, do you think you should first of all capture your local markets before thinking about going global? Or do you think that is something that co-founders, founders would have to consider from the point they start building their team? And okay, this is an idea that I think can go global. So I have to adapt my team so that we can actually pursue that. Or do you think it's something with, okay, let's capture the UK market first. And when we do that, we probably will now see if we have the capacity to start going global. What is your take on that? Maybe Paul, if you could.
Well, yeah, I can talk a couple of things just from experience. Just to sort of flip that question for a second. Just give a couple of examples. So unfortunately, from my perspective, anyway, we're leaving the European market, which is a real problem. But and it's about to get sort of buried under the COVID thing. But one of the interesting dynamics that I've been across is working, and I only really have experience in Europe with this particular issue, is that I actually know a lot of companies in Romania. Okay, it's an area I've worked in a lot. So Eastern Central Europe, and actually those companies, they're not building for the European market. They're tech. They're building it for they're building it for the European and States market, and they actually build the team. They have the developers, they have the guys working, looking at other more lucrative markets from the beginning. Okay, so those engineers, the designers, the whole idea is that the Romanian market is not strong enough. Now it may be in certain areas, and and when I spoke to guys that come here to Cambridge or come to the UK, they've come to learn. There isn't necessarily the resources. And I love Romania, by the way, and it's a great country, but there maybe lacks some of the economic resources. So actually the companies that have been set up, and I can name 5 or 6 of them, specifically are not interested in their local market. They're only interested in the international market, and they're looking for products right from the beginning. And just to sort of pick up on, so that's one thing to really bear in mind, that actually companies as part of their business plan are looking to actually look for other markets. Why not? And then just coming back to what the guys were saying before. I really think that in the business plan, you obviously you want to think what can I do with what I know. But then it comes down to, when you're going to other places, it comes down to partnerships. It's sort of something that Paolo and Joe alluded to, and again, I can only give my small example. I'm not going global, but one of the things that I've done, it's a significant amount of money that we turn over in Russia. The first thing I did was got a lawyer that I could trust, an agent, and work with a local agent. And we have several agents out there that we really trust and we work with because they know the market. So I know that's sort of, I've answered 2 things in one, really, but and I don't want to, maybe I'm contradicting myself, but certainly to answer the question earlier, David, it is about building relations with people that you trust. If you're a startup particularly, I mentioned Innocent, as okay, they got to be quite successful, but it was only when Coca-Cola came in did they go really, truly global. And those guys set up to be local, but they ended up being global. But they really needed the Coca-Cola to be able to get them to go global.
Joe, did you have something to chip in?
I can't remember now. Maybe.
I can't help it. I like to be in the frame. Sorry, I'm a theatre guy. Sorry.
So we are looking at what it means to be a multinational company. So, and I'm asking, do you think it's something that when founders and co-founders are building team, are building their startup, do you think it's a good idea to start thinking about going global from that initial stage? It's not as if they want to go global at that point, because before you go global, just like what Paul has mentioned, you need partnership, you need your capacity, you need the funding, there are a whole lot of things you need to consider.
Yeah.
So we're looking at designing your business model or whatever it is. Will it be ideal to design these things, to adapt them so that it's easy for you to actually go global? If you want to
I think definitely businesses need to be thinking about that from an early stage. Whether they do anything about it at an early stage is different, but they certainly need to be thinking about it. And it also very much depends on what it is that they're selling, their product, services, or whatever it might be. As Paul said, some businesses lend themselves to immediately going international or global, because their business model allows that. For example, consultancy or software developers, of which there are a lot in the part of the world Paul was talking about, and they can perfectly well work for US businesses in that model. For others who have a product, often before you can afford to go global, you need to validate the product and the business model in a low-key way in your domestic market. So I think it definitely depends on the product and services. But just to kind of highlight Paul's point again, it is about, building a team isn't just about the employees in your company. It's about everyone who facilitates your business journey. That includes advisors and everyone else. So if, as Paul said, if you are intending to, develop your business in a certain direction, whether that be a new product or a new market, having trusted advisors is absolutely key.
Okay, I like the fact that you just mentioned team, because that's not going to form a pivotal for me to now navigate into talking about team building. So generally, it looks like team is usually key to success of startups, businesses, and what have you. So my question now, maybe Paula could take this first, is what is the place of team building in driving your idea?
Yeah, so it's actually connected to the idea of, because I think that when we were talking about, say, multinational, I think we're thinking about structure, but also culture, right? And so I know it's a bit of a truism, but it is about the people, isn't it? So I think we all have seen examples where, good ideas have been driven into the ground by a poor management team or by a poor execution team. So people, maybe the innovator themselves are not the best people to lift their idea off the ground. So diversity in the team, diversity of point of views, having a team that is that communicates well, but it's also articulated in a way as to be able to have 360-degree view and identify weaknesses and problems early. I think it's absolutely paramount. I think it's when you bring that kind of diversity, the easiest way to do it is at the cultural level. There are many other levels, but of course, people from different cultures tend to have different perception of risk, for example, different perception of innovation, and so on. So having this type of global view, I think, has several benefits. I don't think that this type of team. It's not necessarily a goal in itself to have this type of optimal team building, but it is always meant to support, your strategic objectives. So the team has to be the best combination of talent, diversity of opinions, and views that can execute the ideas to the best. And in my experience, the best teams are the most diverse teams.
Great. So I'm going to move to Paul. The reason I'm going to move to Paul here now is that while I was doing both my enterprise tech program at George Business School and enterprise tech star, one of the things that Paul helped us adapt to was the issue of team bonding, team building, and all that. So usually I see entrepreneurship as an art. Some people might say it's science, but science itself is also an art. And so if this is true, Paul, what do you think? Who are these actors in entrepreneurship? And how do you select them?
Sorry. Okay, well, it's a big subject, so I think I took quite a while to explore it with you, David. Okay, a couple of things to say here that you know me, I'll get to the point eventually. A couple of things to say is whenever I talk to you, David, to anybody, whether you're studying in the UK, whether you're trying to do a business, often you did your introductory video at the beginning of this talk, and we look at the diversity of people. And I always say, what do you bring to the team? You've got your skill set, which is you're a developer or you're a lawyer or whatever it might be. You have your skill set, but then you have your character, your personality, and your background. What do you bring? What do you bring to it? And I think that is the X factor of not just being competent, but being curious. Not bringing this idea of being good at your job, but building a team of curious people, not being just working towards certain tasks which are fulfilled by a business plan or you're developing an idea, but being opportunity driven. And that is part of a culture. And really we're talking today about curiosity and opportunity in a structured, strategic way. Because if you weren't curious, because if you're going to go global, if you're going to go to another country, it's really hard. It costs a lot of money. That's the first thing, and I think it's the most important thing that we said between us probably is don't do this. And if you're prepared, you have the cash, you have the money to do it, because otherwise you're going to really screw up your business as it is by trying to go either too fast. But if you've got a plan and you've got people that you can recruit, and it might be as simple as they have the skill set to be bilingual or they come from a country. Why am I in these particular countries? These particular countries are because of personal relations and networks that have allowed me into these countries. And that's what happens. But then people bring that skill set. Now, of course, you're not going to just judge. You're not going to do a strategy based on the fact that I happen to have an Indian member of the team, and I happen to have a Sri Lankan, and I happen to have an American. Therefore, I'm going to go to those 3 countries. But what they do is you start to build that perspective, and you recruit people according to their skill set, but you develop their curiosity, you develop their opportunity thinking, and that is and you give people ownership over. Why don't you explore? What would happen? You ask the question, who could be local partners? And we see that actually people's personalities, their characters are given a chance to breathe alongside their skill set. So we recruit people according to skill set, but we also recruit people according to mindset, something that Paolo alluded to as well. And we look for people to be opportunity and curiosity driven. And finally to say is that we celebrate diversity, particularly because it brings something that we're touching on today, which is the desire to connect and to collaborate and to go beyond. And that is what diversity brings into teams as well.
Great. So I'm going to shift to Paolo. Paolo, you've had a long career, and I believe that across that you must have worked with teams and all that. You must have seen the perception that people bring, the skills they bring, the idea they bring, and the quality they bring. So what would be your advice to a founder, a co-founder, an entrepreneur who is trying to put together a team in order to move an idea and ensure that this doesn't die before it's even materialized?
Yeah. So maybe, there are several pieces of advice that I would give, but I would say that you need to surround yourselves with people that are willing to challenge. So that they are willing to to essentially tell you why this idea is a bad idea and how you can make it a better idea, or why it is a good idea, and how can you run it into the ground. So also with people that are willing to go against the grain, and that also, I would say, they communicate well. That if they see something wrong or going on in the wrong direction, they are not shy about telling you that. I think that would be the single piece of advice that I would come up with.
Okay, so Joe, just last on still on this team, because most times I see team as a very key factor when it comes, especially when the startup is not just a founder thing. Even when it's a founder stuff, you still need to build a team to do everything, because just you cannot do it. So my question to you, Joe, is when you want to build a team, what do you think is most important? Is it the skills? Paul mentioned something, build according to skills and then help develop, or something like that. What do you think is most important in building team? Is it understanding among the co-founders, for instance, if it's a business idea that requires co-founders, or is this just the skills, the skill set they are bringing, or is it diversity in terms of gender, color, what have you? These are things that people usually consider when they are building. I have seen a question that actually comes in, which probably is drifting towards the diversity thing.
Sure.
And so,
yeah, well,
what do you say?
I think you have to have both. You have to have skills. You have to have the right skills to get the job done. But you need diversity and differences of opinions, people bringing new ideas, if you're going to take your business to the next level. And I think just the combination is absolutely key. You know, if you've got purely skills, right, it will take you to a certain point. You can do this job well, okay, but it's not going to allow you to develop, change direction, be agile, that kind of thing. You need diversity. You need people challenging in order to adapt your business and to navigate what is going to be a difficult kind of journey in order to kind of maximize the potential of the business. And a lot of my, my opinions on team probably come from different places to Paolo and Paul. I work in a law firm. We have a strict hierarchy. We're quite old-fashioned. But on my other half of my life, I was a semi-professional rugby player for 10 years. And on that side of the team, you need characters, completely different characters. You need the people who are going to be flamboyant and bring a bit of flair. You need people who are just going to do the grunt work. You need people who are going to do what they're told. You need people who are going to challenge and come up with new ideas. You need the diversity, otherwise, it just becomes stagnant and you hit your plateau very quickly.
Okay, great. I think that actually reminds me of an article which I would even recommend for our audience to look at. There was this research that was done by McKinsey, where they compared the productivity and the performance of companies with respect to how diverse they are. And they actually showed that businesses that were more diverse were actually performing better than those businesses that weren't as diverse. So I really understand the role that diversity has to play in trying to bring in those skills, expertise, and diverse background, diverse experience, diverse thoughts, and all of that. Someone might say, okay, my panel is not that diverse. Apologies on that.
Yeah, exactly. No problem there. David, is it possible, can I ask a question of Joe?
Yeah, sure.
So Joe, just I was just thinking, we've talked about teams and diversity and this kind of thing, but actually often startups are based around a founder or one or two founders. And I was just thinking about, while you were talking about some of the legal aspects, thinking about a company like Cambridge Satchel Company, which was born here in Cambridge, had a sort of strong personality leader. She was making satchels in her kitchen, and she managed to go global. And I wonder first of all, what the IP protection would have been on that, how she was able to keep her, the company, this design, And I know that she was a strong personality, the lady who set it up, and she did manage to go global and has gone global with this. And I wonder what the protection would be for a product like that going off into really worldwide markets that's come out essentially out of someone's kitchen.
Sure, yeah. I mean, in terms of registrable rights, you can protect the look of something with registered designs. You can also get unregistered designs, which are a bit like copyright in that they materialize automatically for your creative work, which in this case, is a satchel, has a certain look and it's designed. So you can protect the look of it. But I suspect for her, a lot of her success was based on the goodwill that was associated with her brand, which effectively came from her and her personality. And so in those cases, a strong branding through potentially with the assistance of trademarks, registered trademarks, would allow you to protect some of that goodwill in other countries. If your brand has a particular association. Then that's the way forward. But yeah, I mean, it's just a strong brand which has goodwill associated with it because of this this founder who's has a good personality. That would make it fun.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked that question, David, was because I think it is important to build diverse teams, absolutely. But often you will get a strong founder or co-founders who will drive through their personality, and obviously you're supported by great teams, and that's where you get to expand. I mean, every idea that we talk about as an entrepreneur should be scalable. I mean, truly, otherwise, it's not going to have its opportunity for growth at all. But I was very interested also in the idea of the personality of the founder, or certainly of the brand as well. It becomes the story.
Yeah, exactly. I think I agree with you perfectly on that. So before we move into the next question, we still have a couple of minutes, just like 13 minutes, to kind of continue having the interaction with the panelists. But after that, the rest of the 30 minutes, we are going to devote that to taking your questions. So I would suggest we are actually streaming live on 3 platforms: Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So if you are watching, you have to be watching on the Wolfson Entrepreneurial Society handle, so that you can make comments and we'll be able to see it on the stream on the platform we are using. So once we start, I've seen a couple of questions already. So once we are done with this interaction, we're going to start picking those questions. So just continue posting those questions. We're going to take them in 10 minutes from now. So before we move to the questions, we are also looking at the team. I'm still on the team building and what it takes to have the perfect team for the startup and all that. Sometimes you can see a whole lot of people who kind of have the right skill set that they bring into the idea you are trying to develop. And in terms of their personality, they seem to connect, but yet there might be certain things they had not considered. It could be equity stake. Little things can destroy a team. It could be a shareholder agreement. It could be these little legal stuffs that they never considered until maybe they now realize that the idea is becoming good. They're about to take it to the market to launch it, or they're about to start talking to investors. Then they'll start talking about these things. And before you know what is happening, they no longer agree, but they have been agreeing on certain things they have been doing. So Joe, maybe I will start from you, given your legal background. What do you think is the right time and how to approach these issues so that you don't disintegrate teams that are looking to do startups?
I think the most important thing is to identify any potential issues at the earliest stage possible, so that they don't get a chance to escalate and then you can nip them in the bud, which is obviously easier said than done. The other thing is to, when it comes to legal aspects, speak to an experienced lawyer who's seen it all, basically, and can see things coming that perhaps you can't. Just in terms of, if we're purely talking in terms of, shareholder agreements and things, and and yeah, you need, you as a startup founder, you're probably not going to be experienced. You're not going to be able to foresee everything, but those people who do have experience in that area, if you trust them, then rely on them.
Okay, that's great. So then I have to move to Paul. Paul, you've been working with George Business School to kind of bridge young entrepreneurs through the Enterprise Tech program, Enterprise Tech Star, and all that. And I'm sure you have experience building teams as well. So what do you think? What is your own take about talking about these issues, and when is the right time to talk about these legal stuff that could disintegrate teams along the line?
I really don't know. I think that the most important thing that I think Joe said it actually. I think it's about this idea. You're a founder. Often there's two or three of you, and you get very excited about something, and potentially you hit on something really, and it can grow very, very quickly. It's about taking the opportunity. We understand there's a duality in time between fast and slow that just is really tough to know when to move. I think what Joe said is most important is this realization that the founder doesn't know all the answers. Okay, often you might be a developer, maybe it happens, of course, you can have all the skill sets, but when it's just, for example, when do you get somebody who's an HR expert, really will help. Joe's sort of saying, about these sort of things with contracts, and we're looking at things, who is actually, because actually stuff's done not always on the back of an envelope, or we say on the back of a fag packet or whatever, cigarette packet, but it actually, a lot of stuff is based on, we start doing things, and so I think that there's this idea that the founder should start having these conversations with mentors, whether they have got some investors that are giving them advice, advisory board, whoever it might be, to say, look, you need to get advice because you can't do everything. Do what you're doing, which is helping to develop the vision for this startup, and then get people who can help to support that vision and have those open conversations. And I think that's the key. It's the maturity to say, I don't know all the answers is the key.
Okay, so that brings me to the last question on this team building, which is going to be the issue of trust, and then the issue of doing the right thing. So when it comes to having this discussion, speaking to legal professionals and all that, I've realized that what some co-founders, what they usually do, because maybe the idea is being funded by people who are friends, and they think they can trust each other and not talk about these things. So, Paolo, what do you think? I think I will come back to Joe to probably say a final word on this.
Yeah.
But I would like to hear your own perspective. Do you think it's enough to say, this person is my friend, and we've been friends for like 20 years, so I don't think we are going to have any issue when we start talking about this, and then we overlook these things and begin to run things with that? What is your take on that?
I don't think it's necessarily a good idea. I mean, I think that, when it comes to business, there has to be a way to sort of ensure that everybody is on the same playing field and is thinking about things the same way. So we started with open communication. I think that still remains the most important thing. If there's any concern or questions and all that, it needs to be brought up in the open with no restrictions. And I would say good documentation is essential, like in everything else. You need to document where you are, where you want to go, and you need to capture that in a way that is somehow permanent. So I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to start with a loose structure and a loose assignment of responsibilities, for example, or goals that then can damage the long-term prospect of the company in the long term. So, yeah. And so when you choose the people you want to surround yourself with, I guess my comment is that I will never underestimate the power of your professional network. So, people that you meet, people that you work with, the people that you know, you can always reach out to them for advice. And very rarely has happened to me that I reached out to someone in my professional network and they refused to give me some feedback or advice. And so if you are unsure about the perfect structure for your team, or whether you should include a certain person, or what documentation to put in place so that you're not friends with your friends tomorrow, reaching out to your network is always a good idea.
Yeah, good.
If I back that up, Paolo, because I actually think that when people ask me what is the most important quality of an entrepreneur, you can go through various lists about having great ideas and a vision. Actually, I often say it's networking, your ability to network truly. Because actually what we've talked about today is how do I move my idea forward into different markets, different areas, maybe areas that I don't know. You have to build your network and be able to build people that you trust and know how to, because the idea of just going to the, you want to expand into India, just going through the Indian, Yellow Pages or Google and just looking for a lawyer, whatever it might be. You need to be able to work through, and all of the businesses that I've set up internationally have all come through building some types of relations in those countries. And building my network. So actually, ultimately, building your network of people that you can seek advice from and support, for me, is absolutely fundamental. I think that's one of the most important things that you need as a quality as an entrepreneur.
Okay, in the next 3 minutes before we start taking questions, Joe, I just want to kind of leverage on your background, which is as a patent attorney. What are the process if I'm a researcher and I have a research output from my laboratory which I want to fast track into a startup? What are the processes that I have to do to first protect this idea before launching it as a startup?
Sure. Well, the first thing you should do, especially if you're a Cambridge researcher, is speak to the appropriate people at the university. Ownership rights, are something that you want to get right from the beginning. If you want investors on board, they need to know that you own the IP for a start. So make sure you've sorted that out. Which, if you're working at university, will involve speaking to Cambridge Enterprise in this case. So that's the first thing, and then the next thing is, if it is a science and tech idea, then if you're thinking of commercializing it, then IP is going to be important. So you might want to think about whether it's protectable with patents, and then have the right conversations with the right people to move that forward. And it's particularly important at an early stage to think about IP, because it is very time critical. If you disclose your invention, then it's out there. And anyone can use it, unless, of course, you retain some control through intellectual property rights. So timing is important. Think about it at an early stage, and speak to your advisors or people within your institution.
So just a follow-up question to that. Today we are talking about actually moving global. Now, when you want to protect your idea through filing of IP, I want to believe that if I file an IP for UK market or say European market, such cannot protect my idea in the US or in Asia and all that. So what do you have to say? I guess that's why I was, ab initio, asking about your advice on someone who wants to found a startup. When is the best time to start thinking about globalization of your idea? Because if you have to think about that and you're finding it in the UK or in the European market, where you have to file an IP to protect your idea, what happens to this idea getting into the market we have in Asia? How do you go about it?
Yeah, so intellectual property rights are, they're awarded by the government of a particular country. So they are very much, in a certain country. If you're filing a patent in the UK, it's not going to cover you in the US. But the way that the system works for patents and for trademarks and designs and other registered rights is that you basically get a chance. You file it first in your domestic market, usually where you're based, and then there are systems in place that allow you to expand that intellectual property right into other countries. So your initial filing, the data is very critical, but you do get a bit more time to then go elsewhere. But it is, it really depends how quickly your business moves as to whether and how quickly to move that on. There are time limits. For example, if you're looking to go into the US and other markets, you need to make that decision just over 2 years after your initial filing. So it does set a clock ticking, and if your business isn't really going fast enough in that time, then you might struggle to finance the next phase, which is why my advice always is, once you file the patent application, if you're a new business, then just track on, try and move the business on, sell things, generate income as quickly as you can, try not to sit on it.
Okay, so I wouldn't like to dig deeper into this, because our next topic is going to be on commercialization of research output. So there we're going to handle this detail, but I just felt that when we are talking about globalization and you trying to drive your idea from local to global stage, that the issue of protecting your idea comes on board. That was why I wanted Joe to chip in one or two things in there. So now I'm going to move into taking questions from the audience. Thomas, if you could help bring up the first question that we have there. I think it's from Jedi. Okay, yeah, I think Jody actually asked this question when Paula was talking. He said, I agree with Paula and the international teams. The challenges are sometimes big. What are the challenges in the people area, according to your own experience? I'm trying to remember what we were talking about when he asked this question.
We're talking about international teams and how cultural difference sometimes play a big role. But I think this what I'm going to say applies to everything, to every time you have a team. And I think the biggest challenge when you come from a different culture is unconscious bias. You don't know what you don't know, and someone from a different culture may be coming at your comment or your attitude with an entirely different angle than you expect. So I would say, if I have to name a challenge when it comes to international teams, is unconscious bias, which we all have to get better at. I think we all have some work to do in that regard.
Okay, I see. I know this was specifically for Paula, but Paul, you did mention a whole lot about your international experience, your work with Russia and all that. So what are the challenges that you kind of had when you were?
Well, I'll tell you, when I've worked with some, it's quite interesting actually, just to go back on what Paolo said, it's quite interesting. I certainly have my view of what Russians were like when I started to work with them. And I'm not going to necessarily say that it's changed, particularly having worked there for 15 years. But what's interesting about it, and I mean that in a nice way, is that I've done some consulting with, I mentioned at the very beginning, with Russian firms startups coming to US and UK markets. And it's quite interesting how they set up companies. They kind of hid that they were Russian, and sometimes you really you celebrate the cultural aspects, and sometimes you don't. You try and sort of manage them. And I do remember getting this feeling that I would go and work with some of the guys in the Russian teams, and they were really, really, really delighted. In the days when we would actually go to other people's countries, remember those days? And you'd actually arrive and you'd get real fantastic. Paul is here. Paul's come from Cambridge. It's great. And it'd be so exciting. You just know that we're going to go out for dinner and we're going to do all these things. But when it actually comes to giving them advice, they absolutely do not want to hear it. They just wanted me to go and just be there to wave the flag. But actually, once I was there, they didn't want to take any of my advice, which is not quite true, but it kind of felt that way because they kind of thought they knew best. And it's part of the culture, and it's something I had to really fight with to not, and it's something they had to fight with, to do. So I think what you said actually about unconscious bias is really interesting, Paolo, because it is part of an emotional intelligence kind of portfolio that we have to develop. And that becomes part of working with different cultures. And, this idea of lost in translation is so, and it goes right the way across the way you work with teams, the way you work with your brand, your marketing. There's been classic examples where marketing's gone dramatically wrong, where a word has been, meant something in one country and, you know, complete in one language and completely rude or inappropriate in another language, you know. So I think that the idea that you have certain stereotypes, and I'm joking because most of the stereotypes were fulfilled with the teams that I work with. But anyway, that's my own problem. But actually, it is kind of managing those and celebrating those. And I found people generally, you know, one of the areas I'm really interested in, all of the dynamics we've talked about tonight, all of the dynamics of developing team is pride. Okay, so what I'm really interested in, pride comes in culture, it comes in who you are, where you've come from, how you operate, and it works both ways. It works how you get people to be proud of what they do by setting them challenges. You know, Joe talked about rugby and this sort of thing. You become proud because you're given a role and you develop that role and you develop yourself. It's a leadership technique. And teams that are really successful, organizations that are really successful, and I do a lot of work in towns and cities, well, placemaking, cities that are really successful. One of the things they are really, really dynamic about is, are they proud of what they have done? And that is something to develop. What makes people proud? And that becomes one of the very, very most important dynamics of successful teams that I've discovered. So you have to nurture that. People.
Yeah. So before I move to the next question, Joe, I would like you to chip one or two things as well. You've had experience working across international lines, working with clients, both local and international. So in terms of your experience, your own experience, how does those at the local stage differ, your experience with them differ from those across international lines? What were the challenges?
I mean, to be honest, my client base here in the UK is diverse in itself. I mean, I'm working with people from all different countries and cultures within, you know, they're based in the UK. So it's a difficult comparison. But certainly with, you know, certain, you know, maybe global businesses from kind of Asia, Japan, I think you just have to communicate in a different way, because that culturally that might be how they're used to doing things, and it's obviously different from my point of view. I'm delivering a service to my client, you know, rather than, it's a different kind of collaboration. So I need to communicate with each client in the best possible way, and I think it's a bit about emotional intelligence. It's about getting to know your client well. It's about personal relationship that you have with them, and you learn over time how to communicate with them in the most effective way. But you have to be open to that, obviously. I think that's the important thing.
Okay, so I guess we could get to the next question. This is coming from Abba. So the nation state of Israel is referred to as startup nation, since most of the startups look to sell out to bigger companies. Should that realism be more ubiquitous? I don't know who want to take on this first.
Well, I'm not terribly familiar with the Israel case study. I think that there's several reasons why it's maybe others can speak to why it referred to a startup nation. I did hear that before. Part of the reason may be cultural, also geographical, and the fact that the whole culture of the nation is, from what I hear, built about quick adoption of innovation. But I think that when it comes to the startup looking out to sell, is that really the case? I think clearly selling to bigger companies is one possible exit, but I'm sure that some startups have the ambition to go global themselves. So I don't think we should necessarily be thinking about a quick exit being the only model. It's certainly a very popular model, and there are many reasons why that's a good idea, but it's not the only model when it comes to bringing the startup promise to realization. So maybe others can comment on the Israel case study.
Yeah, well, I've heard similar things said about Cambridge startups over the years, but I think there are two. They're very, as Paolo says, it's two very different exits. If you want to if you want to start something up and sell it quickly, that's very different to taking it on yourself. And I think it depends on who you are as an individual. If you really enjoy the creative, coming up with the idea. If you're a serial entrepreneur, then you're going to want to exit and say you can move on to the next thing. And it really depends on the individuals and where they want to take it, I think.
I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Because why do you become an entrepreneur? Sometimes it sneaks up on you. You have an idea, or and then you pursue that idea. But also tactically, you could be following this. Again, I'll be careful because I don't really know too much about the Startup Nation. I know there's the dynamism and the culture, the ecosystem is very supportive. And I do know. I mean, having read a little bit, I might be wrong here. It's also that I think there's still national service, isn't there, in terms of the army, and you get a lot of people going into the army and then coming out with some real strong skill sets, and self-development that is very empowering. I mean, I might be wrong there, but get the impression. But also, it is about the Israel model and others. Is about the within a country, what is the environment, legal, structural, business environment to actually support the startup, or that startup environment. And we see more and more governments. So when I was out in South America, I was working for UKTI, looking at relations between South America, Uruguay, Brazil, and Argentina, and the UK. And you different models of a small country like Uruguay really focused on building, and maybe it's the scale as well, building startups. Because they see it as the future, and you see it more and more all over the world, where governments are giving opportunities for people. Therefore, that might be, I haven't got an idea yet, but I look at the market, I see the opportunities, I see grants, I see funding, I see an ecosystem. I don't see a future in a corporate environment. Maybe I see a future in a startup. And it could be that I'm looking at the startup environment, I'm thinking, what could I actually do to be an entrepreneur? I don't have an idea. But I see an opportunity, and my end goal is to create a business, and I can see which would then sell out, be able to sell. And so actually, tactically and structurally, I see that as a career, as an opportunity, and then I become a serial entrepreneur. Maybe not because I'm an inventor, or not because I'm a whatever, but actually because I see strategically an opportunity to gain investment and go into that market, because maybe the environment is one which supports that particular type of dynamic. I don't know.
Okay, great. That's really amazing insight with respect to all of that. I think we can go next to the next question. Okay, this is coming from Chukuma. So, what would be your advice on strategies for building sustainable business, either local or in global arena? So I don't know, maybe Paolo, you could go first.
I can start. I mean, I think these days, given what's going on around us, I think every business has to have a sustainability vision, right? So I think we can afford, more, businesses that do not address, that question. So, and luckily, at the moment there is strong support from governments for businesses that start for sustainability ideas. And so I think that all one has to do is to have a vision for sustainability. I think that's a very general question. I mean, but most likely, I think most businesses can have a vision for sustainability embedded in their business plan. And I think that should be first and foremost on an entrepreneur's mind. Is my business sustainable? Am I going to leave the world a better place than when I started, right?
Yeah. So, Paul, do you have something to chip in?
Well, I guess I know what I was thinking about. Maybe not a direct answer, but I worked with an organisation called Universum, and they do these reports which are from worth looking at, which is which companies are recruiting which types of people and why. And they do all these. It's a global report. Who's recruiting who? Universal. It's easy access to the reports. They're very, very interesting. And each time they've been going for like 30, 40 years. based in somewhere in I think it's Norway or Finland, maybe even Sweden. It's somewhere around that area, and I forget. But what's really interesting is that they really look across the years, decades, about what is the motivation for people to join certain organisations, and it's really interesting to go from literally I want to earn lots of money through to I want to work for an organisation that has a sustainable kind of vision. I want to have flexible working hours. So actually, it is very clear that there is a big shift in what types of businesses people either want to work for or want to set up. And of course, you set up, it's a business, you're an entrepreneur, you're setting up a business, that's your strategy. But within that, there is often actually an element, if not directly, an element that if you're going to recruit a team, that you need to have a sustainable vision for what you're doing, because actually that is part of your story, and it's your recruitment story, it's your selling story, it's your, it is your story. So I think, the strategies for building sustainable businesses is just be aware that even if that is not your direct kind of, you're not doing something that's going to reduce carbon or whatever directly, but actually you find that angle, and even if it's not direct, you actually make sure that it is a vocal part of your vision, that you are not doing damage, you're actually doing some good, because actually people want to work for those companies and with those companies and want to buy from them as well.
Great. So finally, Joe, do you have something to chip into the issue of sustainability as well?
Not particularly. I agree with both what Paolo and Paul have said, to be honest. I think, the next generation of entrepreneurs, employees and consumers, are going to hold businesses accountable for some level of social responsibility. I think that's just, that's just going to be the new, what's going to happen. It's going to be, I don't want to use new normal, I'll just say it anyway.
Oh, yeah. We should have a fine system. We should have a fine system. You're the first one to get fined.
Yeah, but that will become the paradigm. There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so yeah, I think the key point from this question is why start entrepreneurs, founders, co-founders are thinking about their businesses. They should think sustainability. I think we can go to the next question now. Okay, so this is coming from One. So given that this is an all-male panel, apologies for that. I actually tried to make it balanced, but it was sort of difficult. It would be interesting to hear what challenges you have experienced in going global. Do these challenges apply to women as well? Do the market that one chooses to enter a factor, or does it influence team building, etc.?
Okay. Can I just start by saying one interesting thing, I suppose. We're the panel, and of course I'm a big believer in diversity as well. Of course, absolutely, and but interestingly, when I reflect on, we've been saying today about building partnerships, about building relationships, and about trusting people, I can say hand on heart, every single one of the key partners that I work with internationally are women. Just happens to be. And that's not necessarily because I've designed it that way. It just happens to be that the people that I'm working with in these complex places, and when I'm talking about working in Russia, I'm not just talking about St. Petersburg and Moscow. I'm talking about going into Siberia and going in right across this vast country. And even within the Czech Republic and other parts of Europe that I've been working, Italy and Germany, I've found that my key partnerships have been with women. That is not by design. It just happens to be that I've built trusted relations with women over these types of things. And so I don't know if that is answered the question, but it is a fact that I've found my trusted partners to be women. So I'll throw that into the discussion.
Yes. So Paula, do you have any additions?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I would be uncomfortable sort of bringing, the women entrepreneur, point of view to the discussion. I think that maybe, David, you could have another panel where, that point of view is better represented. But I think that when it comes to challenges in building a global team, I think this applies this applies globally. I think it's some of the same challenges, and some of them we touched upon. We talked about the need to have a strong network that can support you in your entrepreneurship. I think one thing that we haven't talked about is sometimes work-life balance. How to balance business and family life. As you know, entrepreneurship is a lot of hard work, and that brings with it challenges in balancing the demands at home, the demands at work, and that of course the balance changes depending on who you are. Also I think being able to own your value, to make sure to be the best advocate for yourself. I think it's a good characteristic that an entrepreneur should have, especially a global entrepreneur, be able to sell yourself, to storytell, what your value proposition is. And I think this also applies equally, to men and women. But like I said, I would be uncomfortable bringing the actual, the woman point of view, but I would like to bring some challenges that I think apply, and maybe, the audience can find ways to translate this to their particular experience.
So Joe, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, similar to Paolo, I've not experienced this firsthand. But I imagine the same challenges will apply regardless of sex or gender or whatever. But I think the key thing that we've kind of transcends everything we've said is that a lot of your kind of strategy or how you move from one market to another is about the relationships that you develop. And I think that just it doesn't matter whether you're male or female, you can still develop strong relationships with the people that are going to help you along the way. I think obviously you need to have a woman panelist to comment on any specific challenges that they may have experienced in their in their life. But I imagine it's the same across the board, and certainly there's no real major challenge on a large scale that would apply to women but not men.
Yeah. So I think I quite agree with every contribution that the panelists have made, especially with respect to when you want to drive your ideas. You probably are looking for skills. You are looking to tap into the network that you have. But looking at this particular question, because I have had this argument with someone, but not with respect to entrepreneurship, where we are looking at the hierarchy you have within organizations, and the fact that, for instance, women are not at those top tier levels of across organizations. And someone was asking, does it mean that we don't really have women who will be able to do the job, or how do we continue to say that it's just this family issue and these stuff that prevents women from getting to those levels? But if you look around the world, you will see women who are doing great exploits across. So what do you think are the factors that kind of limit those connections, those networks we build, so that it makes it look as if the only network we can build are those male-dominated networks? I'm wondering, I don't know how this plays, but sometimes that is what it looks like. I know that you have to depend on your networks, but then our networks looks as if it's male-dominated. Are there factors that you think kind of controls this sort of thing?
Well, I guess I've got a couple of things to say very quickly. One is just from a point of view, just a sort of insight, I suppose. One of the things when you work in where I do, performing arts, there's an adage, which is the audience grows up with you. And you have to be very conscious to actually appeal to wider audiences. So otherwise, all of the people that if you're not very careful, when you start working, you appeal to young people when you're young. And as you go, your audience gets older, and then, you find so you have to very consciously look at the markets you're dealing with and make sure that you're working strategically with different markets. But the answer, I think the answer to your question, David, is very difficult. Actually, it's cultural and historical dynamics. But one thing I would say, if it is challenging and we're saying that historically we can see the numbers for women to be in senior positions, we see things are changing, hopefully, within corporations. The thing to do is, therefore, the opportunity is there for women with equal skill sets, with equal opportunities to be entrepreneurs, to be in the startup world. And that is clear. And you play to your strengths, whatever they are. And I don't think it's about sex. I think it's about what you bring in your personality, your experience, your drive. But by definition, being an entrepreneur is starting from a blank sheet of paper, whoever you are. And actually, the opportunities, not just for men or white men or whatever, are universal in the startup world. And you find your niche. And I think that is key. I do think it may well still be difficult. We're talking about going global. I think there still is elements of sexism and cultural challenges that maybe women will find when they try and do business. And I think that is a problem. And I think it has to be challenged. And you work together as a team, supporting each other to be able to get the best result you can. But the beauty of startup is starting from essentially a level playing field. And that's where I think the opportunity needs to be taken.
Yeah, Paul, let me echo some of what you said. I think because we listed some challenges that are common to entrepreneurs globally, it doesn't mean that some of these challenges don't hit one category harder than another. And I think we have to be very conscious of that. When we facilitate the work of entrepreneurs, that some of them, some categories that, as we mentioned, maybe coming from different angles, and actually see. May actually have obstacles, that there are not obstacles for others. And so we have to be very conscious of that.
Okay. So thank you very much. So we've got like 5 minutes to go. And so for these 5 minutes, I will want to employ the panelists to kind of give us 1 or 2 takeaway tips for founders and co-founders and entrepreneurs out there. And because our last question that we have tended to has something to do with women, I wanted to also specifically give some tips and encouragement to our women entrepreneurs out there. Maybe, I don't know, Paul, can we start with you, if you don't mind?
Sure. Well, I think I kind of answered a little bit of that question before, which is, we're on a level playing field when it comes to startup. And I think you play to your own advantage. Where do you come from? What are you? Like I said earlier, where, and Joe alluded to it, that we're in this multicultural environment where actually your way of thinking, your way of approaching, whatever your personality, your experience is what drives you to be unique, to come up with those ideas, to find partnerships. And the more diverse, literally, wherever we find that diversity, that becomes a great strength. And we look at successful teams. Joe talks about rugby. I've worked, as you know, David, and others will know, a lot in professional sports, with Formula One and with football. And now Formula One is not the most diverse sport, but and that's a challenge. But we do see things changing, because that's part of the challenges. But actually, football is totally changing. It is now it becomes the most diverse sport. We see now, as I turned on the television yesterday, I'm watching women playing football in the FA Cup final. And things are changing. We get new dynamics that everybody can get involved in. But my tip, I suppose, for the entrepreneur is to be able to bring the best of yourself and to challenge it and reflect in this diversity of thinking, which will ultimately create the unique passage that you need to be going along if you are going to be successful in finding a new tranche or a new journey point for your idea.
That is really powerful. Thank you very much, Paul. So, Joe, do you mind giving your last word to our audience?
Yeah, sure. I think, key is, acknowledging where your strengths and weaknesses are, and absolutely being, proud and putting yourself out there in terms of your strengths. But on the other side, recognize when you need someone else, whether it's be someone just with a different way of looking at things, or someone with a different experience. And absolutely don't be kind of afraid to acknowledge that you can't deal with everything, and get the help on board that you need.
So, and last but not the least, Paula.
Sure. I think the common one consideration that sort of comes to mind is that there's challenges with entrepreneurship, right? There are sometimes it looks like a club. It's you don't know how to break in. The sort of network, and I think when you then talk to entrepreneurs and you try to understand what makes them click, is like it all boils down to making good decisions when they're needed, and to have and to employ common sense. And then once you realize that that's really the secret sauce, it's like there is some sort of an empowerment that comes to that. It's like you can do that, and I think that's sort of is the message. It's within reach, and it just takes the understanding that the confidence. I think the quote that I was looking for is from Claire Yarwood White. There is much of the secret is really common sense and making good decisions at the right time. And so this results in a growth of confidence that makes you think, I could do something like that. And I think that's the message that I would like to leave.
Thank you very much, Paolo. It is still going global with local startup idea, building your team for the global stage. I want to especially thank our audience for such an amazing contributions and wide view that have been shared. And to summarize, I will simply say to our audience, your idea is never local. It might be local, but it always have that global tendency. So think big and go for it. So hopefully we'll see you again fortnight, where we'll be talking about commercialization of research outputs. Until then, thank you everyone and keep safe.